Babe Ruth walked back to the dugout for the 5th time. Sat down. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked. Because when you sat next to Ruth on a bad day, you didn't look. You understood what looking invited. That day, Ruth didn't invite anything. He sat quietly. The game continued. The innings passed. The final out was made. Everyone walked to the locker room, and Ruth stood up, picked something up, and went to find the pitcher who had struck him out 5 times. Did he find him? And when he found him, what happened? To understand that, you need to understand what a bad day for Babe Ruth actually looked like, and what it cost the man who caused it. The year was 1923. The place was Yankee Stadium, the stadium that had opened that season, the house that Ruth built. The pitcher's name was not one that appears in history books with any frequency. He was a journeyman, a professional who showed up and threw, and had good days and bad days, and whose career would be measured not by records or Hall of Fame plaques, but by the simple fact of having lasted long enough in professional baseball to count as someone who made it. On this particular afternoon in 1923, he was having the best day of his career. Possibly the best day any pitcher had ever had against Babe Ruth. He struck Ruth out in the 1st inning, struck him out again in the 3rd, again in the 5th. Ruth's swing, which was one of the most studied and analyzed swings in the history of the sport, was not finding this pitcher's stuff, was not timing the delivery, was arriving at the location where the ball should have been, and finding empty space. 3 strikeouts, and the game was already something the record books would note. Then the 7th inning came. Ruth came to the plate again, struck out again. 4 strikeouts in one game against one pitcher. The crowd at Yankee Stadium, Ruth's crowd, the crowd that had been coming to watch Ruth since he arrived in New York, was not angry, was not booing, was simply stunned into the specific silence that descends when something happens that contradicts the understood order of things. Babe Ruth struck out 4 times in one game by one pitcher. Then the 9th inning came. The at-bat in the 9th inning was different from the first 4. Not because the pitcher was different. He was the same pitcher, same stuff, same delivery, same day, but because Ruth was different. Not visibly different. Not different in a way that anyone watching from the stands could have detected or named, but different in the way that certain kinds of competitors get different when they have been beaten multiple times by the same person, and the game is in its final moments and there is one more chance. The focus that a man brings to a last chance is a specific kind of focus. It is not panic. It is not desperation. It is the clearing away of everything that is not the next pitch. The crowd in the stands, the 4 strikeouts already logged in the official scorer's book, the way the pitcher had been working the count, the adjustments that had not worked, all of it gone. Just this pitch, just this at-bat, just this moment. Ruth stepped in. The pitcher worked him. The count moved. And then Ruth swung. Strike 3. 5 strikeouts in one game, against one pitcher. Ruth turned, walked back to the dugout, sat down. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked. The locker room after the game had the specific atmosphere that locker rooms have when things have not gone as expected. Not disaster. The Yankees had won the game despite Ruth's performance. But the kind of subdued quality that comes when the most important player on the team has had a day that defies easy explanation. Players moved through their routines, changed clothes, spoke in the specific low register of men who are processing something without wanting to make a production of the processing. Ruth sat at his locker. Did not speak. Did not throw anything. Did not create the scene that Ruth sometimes created when his frustration found its way to the surface. He sat, and he thought, and what he was thinking about was the pitcher who had struck him out 5 times. Not with anger, not with the specific heat of a man who wants to damage something. With something colder and more lasting, with curiosity, with the need to understand. Because Babe Ruth had been struck out before, had bad days before, had come back to the dugout with the bat failing to find the ball before. But 5 times against the same pitcher in the same game was something that demanded an accounting, demanded an explanation, demanded that Ruth understand what had happened so that it would not happen again. He found the pitcher after the game, in the corridor between the visiting and home locker rooms at Yankee Stadium. The pitcher was heading back to wherever visiting players went after games. Ruth was heading in the same direction, and their paths crossed in the specific way that paths cross in the corridors of baseball stadiums. Not planned, not arranged, just the geography of two men whose movements brought them to the same narrow space at the same moment. The pitcher saw Ruth coming. He was not a small man. No pitcher in the major leagues in 1923 was a small man. But standing in a corridor, in the path of Babe Ruth, after striking him out 5 times, was a specific kind of uncomfortable. He had been having conversations with himself all game about what would happen after. Had decided that Ruth would either ignore him or have something pointed to say. He was prepared for both. He was not prepared for what actually happened. Ruth stopped, looked at him, not angrily, not with the expression of a man who is about to say something that will require an apology, just looked. Then he said something. He told the pitcher that he had pitched him differently than anyone else, that the delivery had something in it, something in the timing, in the angle, in the way the ball came out of his hand, that had disrupted Ruth's ability to time the swing. He said it specifically. Not generally, not the compliment that a man gives to the player who beat him because the social situation demands a compliment. Specifically, with the detail of a man who has been thinking about this problem since the first inning and has identified exactly what the problem was. Then Ruth asked a question. He asked the pitcher to show him, to demonstrate the delivery, right there in the corridor, what the release point looked like, what the arm angle was, what it was that had produced 5 strikeouts against a man who had produced more home runs than any player in the history of the sport. Subscribe right now if you've ever watched someone turn failure into a lesson in real time. Hit like if you think this is the most Ruth thing Ruth ever did. And drop a comment. How do you respond when someone beats you at your own game? Because what the pitcher did next is something nobody expected. The pitcher stood there in the corridor of Yankee Stadium and processed what Babe Ruth had just asked him, the most famous baseball player in the world. The man he had just struck out 5 times in front of 60,000 people, was asking him to demonstrate the delivery that had done it, was asking with genuine curiosity and without a trace of hostility, was treating the conversation as an educational exchange between two professionals who had just competed and were now, in the space after competition, interested in understanding what had happened. The pitcher showed him, went through the motion, explained what he had been doing with the release point, described the grip, talked about the angle of approach, and how he had been trying to disrupt Ruth's timing by varying it slightly from at-bat to at-bat. Ruth watched, asked questions. Specific questions that showed he had been paying attention in ways that the 5 strikeouts had obscured. That even while the swing was failing to connect, the mind behind the swing was cataloging everything for future reference. The conversation lasted perhaps 15 minutes. It took place in a corridor at Yankee Stadium in 1923, with nobody else present, and no record kept of exactly what was said. What is known comes from the pitcher's own account, given years later when the story had become something he told because it said something real about what Babe Ruth actually was. The pitcher said that Ruth had asked him more intelligent questions about pitching mechanics in 15 minutes than most coaches had asked him in years. That Ruth understood the delivery from the hitter's perspective in a way that was unusual, saw the arm angle and the release point and the grip as problems to be solved rather than just phenomena to be experienced. And the pitcher said something else. He said that after the conversation, he was genuinely uncertain whether he would be able to strike Ruth out the next time they faced each other. Because the advantage he had held, the specific thing that had produced 5 strikeouts, had been identified and examined and filed by Ruth in real time. Whatever had disrupted Ruth's timing that afternoon had been located and analyzed. The next time would be different. The next time was different. Ruth hit a home run off the same pitcher the following season. He said nothing to him about it afterward. Did not make a point of the home run in relation to the 5 strikeouts. Did not bring up the corridor conversation. Just hit the home run and rounded the bases and crossed home plate and returned to the dugout the way Ruth returned to the dugout after home runs. With the unhurried pace of a man who has done something he expected to do and is already thinking about the next time. The 5 strikeouts were a lesson. The lesson had been taken. The home run was the result of the lesson. That was the complete transaction. That was Ruth. Not the man who threw bats when things went wrong. Not the man who blamed the pitcher or the umpire or the conditions. The man who sat quietly in the dugout when things went wrong and waited and went to find the person who had beaten him and asked them to explain how they had done it, and then made sure they couldn't do it again. The silence in the dugout after the 5th strikeout was not defeat. It was the beginning of the lesson that would produce the home run, the lesson that had always been how Ruth stayed Ruth.